What would make a mother leave her child alone for 6 days while she parties in paradise? What could possibly be so tempting, so irresistible, that a woman would abandon her own flesh and blood, leaving her child to suffer in an empty apartment, alone and afraid? This is the chilling story of Vanessa Harper, a woman whose life seemed full of promise, full of potential. But beneath her picture-perfect facade, a dark, twisted secret simmered, one that would unravel the very heart of a mother's love and responsibility. Vanessa wasn't just a woman seeking escape, she was a woman running away. While she sipped cocktails by the beach, Lily, her 2-year-old daughter, sat in a cold, dark apartment with no one to care for her. 6 days of agony, 6 days of neglect. But what kind of mother could walk away from their child like that? What drives someone to make a choice so cold, so heartless? To abandon their own flesh and blood for their own selfish indulgence? Vanessa had everything: a glamorous lifestyle, a chance to live in luxury. But Lily was just a child, unaware of her mother's betrayal. She was a little girl who trusted Vanessa with everything she had. And in return, Vanessa chose her own desires over her daughter's life. How could this happen? How could a mother make such a choice? Lily Harper was just 2 years old, a tiny soul with a heart full of love and trust. She had her whole life ahead of her, filled with the promise of childhood joys, laughter, love, security. She deserved a mother who would protect her, who would fight to give her a better life. But instead, Lily was left alone in an apartment that should have been a place of comfort and safety. Her little hands, once reaching out to the warmth of her mother's embrace, were now left empty, alone. Vanessa, her mother, was a woman with dreams of something greater, something beyond the confines of motherhood. She had been born into the foster system, growing up with little to call her own. The trauma from those early years shaped her, leaving her craving the attention and affection she never received. As a young woman, Vanessa believed that love came with material things: expensive clothes, lavish vacations, the kind of life you flaunted on social media. She was constantly chasing something she couldn't define, but she thought the next big thing would fill the emptiness inside her. When Lily was born, there was a moment of joy. For a while, Vanessa cared for her daughter, hoping that perhaps this was the love she had been searching for all her life. But the pressures of motherhood, the demands of responsibility, weighed on Vanessa more than she could bear. The guilt, the sleepless nights, it all became too much. Soon, she began to resent what she saw as the chains of motherhood. Lily became more of a burden, a constant reminder of the life Vanessa had abandoned for the allure of glamour. And it wasn't just about enjoying life anymore. It became about escaping the life Vanessa never wanted to face. Vanessa's decision to abandon Lily didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual shift. It began with small moments of neglect. A night out with a babysitter turned into another night, and then another. Slowly, the bond she once shared with her daughter began to erode, replaced by the call of a lifestyle that promised freedom and excitement. Vanessa's fixation on a life of indulgence pushed her further away from the reality of what was happening at home. Each moment of neglect, each selfish decision, pushed Lily further out of her thoughts. The dream of a carefree life became a driving force. And soon, Vanessa couldn't see the child she had once cradled in her arms. She only saw the opportunity to escape. The world she longed for was just a plane ride away, and no one was going to stop her from getting there, not even her own daughter. The first signs were subtle. Small moments where Vanessa chose herself over her daughter. A night out with a friend, a party with people who promised to make her feel special. These moments grew longer, more frequent. Lily, left with a babysitter, seemed to fade into the background of Vanessa's mind. At first, Vanessa didn't even realize the shift. She still told herself she loved her daughter. She still told herself that motherhood was important, just not as important as the life she dreamed of. But as the weeks passed, the excuses piled up. Lily was always there, asking for her mother's attention, asking for affection. Vanessa was growing weary, too tired to be the mother Lily needed. And then came the vacation, a promise of paradise. Vanessa's dreams of freedom were finally within reach. She met Jordan Stone, a man who seemed to offer her everything she had ever wanted: luxury, adventure, a life full of indulgence. He wasn't someone who cared about the weight of responsibility. He was a scam artist, offering Vanessa a taste of a world she had always envied. In him, she saw the escape from her past, the chance to reinvent herself. And to Vanessa, this escape was more important than anything, even Lily. She didn't tell Jordan about her daughter. Lily wasn't part of her plan. In the glow of the excitement, Vanessa pushed her guilt aside, refusing to let the heavy burden of motherhood slow her down. She was going to live the life she had always dreamed of. Vanessa's preparations were methodical. The suitcases were packed. The plane tickets were booked. She made sure Lily had a sitter for the next few days, someone who would look after her while she took what she saw as a much-needed break. But as the days leading up to her departure passed, the doubt and guilt that crept into her mind were easily silenced by the promise of paradise. She didn't need to feel guilty. Lily would be fine, she told herself. It would only be for a few days. She would come back refreshed and ready to be the mother Lily deserved. But deep down, Vanessa knew that wasn't true. She knew that Lily wasn't fine. She was alone. She was suffering. And still, Vanessa boarded the plane to Hawaii, her mind already drifting to the next party, the next moment of indulgence. The thought of her daughter was now a distant echo, easily drowned out by the music of her new life. But what Vanessa didn't realize, what she couldn't have known, was that her decision to leave Lily behind wasn't just a simple, neglectful act. It was the start of something far darker. While Vanessa was sipping cocktails on a sun-kissed beach, Lily was growing weaker, alone, forgotten. Each minute that passed, each hour that stretched into the next, she was losing hope, and Vanessa was too far gone in her selfish pursuit of happiness to even notice. 6 days passed. 6 days of freedom for Vanessa. 6 days spent in paradise, where every need was catered to and every desire was fulfilled. But back at home, in the quiet of the apartment, Lily's life was slipping away. The apartment was eerily silent, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The air was stale, thick with the odor of neglect. No laughter, no warmth, no sign of the joy that a 2-year-old should bring into a home. Lily, once vibrant and full of life, had faded into a pale shadow of herself. The small body, so full of promise, was now lifeless. Her tiny fingers lay limp by her side, the empty bottle of milk beside her untouched. She had cried herself to sleep, time and time again, but this time there was no one to comfort her, no one to pick her up and rock her to sleep. She was alone. The stench of neglect hit the officers first as they entered the apartment. They knew something was horribly wrong the moment they stepped inside. There was no sign of life, just an abandoned, empty shell, and in the corner on the cold floor was Lily. The officers paused. Their hearts sank. They could already tell what had happened. The small child, left in a cold apartment for days, had passed away. Alone, forgotten. The initial shock of the discovery didn't set in until later, when the full weight of the situation unfolded. There was no food in the fridge, no warmth, no indication that anyone had been taking care of Lily. It was as though Vanessa had completely erased her from her life, disappearing for 6 days without a care for the little girl who depended on her. Lily's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a crime, a mother's crime, and it was one that Vanessa was going to have to face. Back in Hawaii, Vanessa's vacation was over. The time she spent living in the glow of luxury was about to come to a screeching halt. As the news of Lily's death spread, the reality of Vanessa's actions began to surface. The paradise she had been living in now seemed like a cruel joke. After 6 days of indulgence, as the sun set over the tropical beaches of Hawaii, Vanessa Harper's paradise came crashing down. The officers arrived at her luxury resort, their footsteps cold against the warm, golden sands. It wasn't the vacation she had imagined. The news was out. The death of her daughter, Lily, had been discovered, alone, in an apartment that had been devoid of life for days. The lifeless child was found, her innocence stolen. The horrific reality of Vanessa's actions was now undeniable. She was arrested without hesitation, handcuffed, and led away from the paradise she'd been so desperate to escape. The smiles, the carefree moments, all faded as the reality of the crime she had committed sank in. She was no longer the woman with the designer bags, the picture-perfect life. She was now a mother accused of the unthinkable. As the police transported her back from Hawaii to face the consequences, Vanessa was numb. Denial was her first defense. She couldn't understand the magnitude of what she had done. Her daughter, alone, how had it come to this? In her mind, she hadn't meant for this to happen. But as the weeks unfolded, her defense grew weak. There was no denying the truth. The detectives questioned her, and it became clear Vanessa's detachment had been building for months, maybe even years. Her neglect was more than an accident. It was a series of choices she had made, each one colder than the last. The neglect didn't start with Lily's death. It began with every night she left her daughter with a sitter, every party she attended instead of being a mother, and every selfish indulgence she pursued. Each choice she made led her to the final, irreversible one. Vanessa's guilt began to weigh on her, though she would never fully admit it. The reality of Lily's death, of her own hand in it, crept slowly into her mind. But it wasn't enough to change her course. It wasn't enough to turn back time. The days leading up to her trial were filled with tension. The media surrounded her family, the community, and the courtroom, all eager to see justice served. Vanessa's arrest was the first step in a long, agonizing road toward accountability. Her lawyer attempted to defend her, pointing to her troubled past, growing up in the foster system, struggling to find her place in the world. They argued that her neglect was a result of overwhelming stress, the pressures of motherhood, and the mental toll that being a parent had taken on her. But as the evidence began to pile up, Instagram photos showing her lavish lifestyle, receipts from her luxury vacation, and testimonies from those who had seen her neglect Lily, the defense started to crumble. There was no escaping the truth. The prosecution, led by a relentless attorney, argued that this wasn't a case of stress or mental illness. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a conscious, calculated decision to abandon a child. They painted Vanessa as a woman consumed by her own desires, someone who chose her fantasies over the life of her daughter. As the trial date loomed closer, Vanessa's world was collapsing. Her family, torn between grief and anger, prepared for the painful testimony that would expose the full depth of her neglect. Lily's grandparents, devastated by the loss of their granddaughter, prepared to take the stand, their voices shaking with sorrow and disbelief. The day of the trial finally arrived. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and the community that had once admired Vanessa. But now, they all sat in silence, waiting for the gavel to fall. As the judge entered the courtroom and the doors slammed shut, the reality hit Vanessa like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about a child's death. It was about the choices she had made, the life she had stolen, and there was no escaping what was coming next. He spoke of Lily's suffering, how the child, alone in an apartment for 6 days, had cried out for help, for comfort, for the love of a mother who had long abandoned her. The contrast between Vanessa's life of indulgence and her daughter's suffering was stark. The prosecutor presented Instagram photos, pictures of Vanessa on a beach, laughing with Jordan Stone, surrounded by luxury. Each image painted a picture of a woman who was so absorbed in her pursuit of wealth and status that she lost sight of the child who depended on her. Vanessa's posts, filled with joy and freedom, were juxtaposed with the horrific reality that Lily had been lying lifeless in the apartment she was supposed to be protected in. The courtroom was tense as the prosecutor's voice rang out. This was not a mistake. This was not negligence. This was a conscious, deliberate decision to abandon a child in her most vulnerable moment. Vanessa Harper chose luxury over life. She chose herself over her daughter, and that choice led to a death that never should have happened. Vanessa's emotional breakdown came as the jury deliberated. She was no longer the woman in glamorous photos. The reality of her actions, the magnitude of the life she had taken, began to sink in. Her eyes were red, her face puffy from crying, but her tears seemed to be for herself, not for Lily. The weight of her crime pressed down on her, but there was no escape, no turning back. Then came the heartbreaking testimony from Lily's grandparents. Their grief was palpable. They spoke of the love they had for their granddaughter, of the loss that could never be filled. They described a little girl who never had a chance to experience the joy of childhood, a little girl who had been abandoned by the one person she should have been able to trust the most. Their words were like a punch to the gut, and Vanessa, sitting in the defendant's chair, could no longer deny the horror of what she had done. Vanessa's defense attorney tried to argue her case, suggesting that Vanessa's actions were a result of mental illness, pointing to postpartum depression as a reason for her detachment. They argued that Vanessa had been overwhelmed, unable to handle the pressures of motherhood. But the prosecutor's rebuttal was sharp. Postpartum depression doesn't make someone abandon their child for 6 days. Postpartum depression doesn't make someone choose a vacation over the life of their own flesh and blood. This was a choice, a selfish, cold decision to leave a 2-year-old to die in a dark, lonely apartment. The weight of that truth was undeniable. Vanessa had made a choice. She had left her daughter to die, and now she was going to pay the price. The day of sentencing arrived. The courtroom was quiet, heavy with the weight of the verdict. The room was filled with the grieving faces of Lily's family, the community, and the people who had watched as Vanessa's life unraveled before their eyes. There was no more glamour, no more photos of luxury, no more parties or vacations. The woman who had once been the center of attention was now just a prisoner, shackled by the consequences of her own actions. Vanessa stood in front of the judge, her eyes bloodshot, her face devoid of the confidence she once wore so boldly. Gone was the woman who smiled for the cameras, the woman who flaunted her life for the world to see. Instead, there was a broken woman, lost and hollow, realizing the magnitude of what she had done. The judge's voice echoed in the courtroom. "Vanessa Harper, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The words were final. They were clear. There would be no second chances, no moments of redemption. Vanessa's choices had led her to this point, and now she would pay for them with the rest of her life. Lily's grandparents, still mourning the loss of their precious granddaughter, looked on in silence. Their faces were tear-streaked, but there was no relief. Nothing could bring Lily back. Nothing could undo the devastation that Vanessa's choices had caused. The community was left to grieve a child who had never had the chance to grow up, a life that was stolen by the selfishness of a mother who should have protected her. Vanessa, once a woman who longed for the riches of the world, now found herself stripped of everything. The lavish vacations, the Instagram fame, the attention, none of it mattered now. All of it had been nothing more than a distraction, a fleeting fantasy. The real price had been paid in the death of her daughter. As Vanessa was led away, the reality of her crime settled over the room. There would be no more chances for redemption. There would be no more moments of selfish indulgence. The woman who had abandoned her child for 6 days in favor of her own desires would now face the consequences for the rest of her life. But for Lily's family, the grief would never fade. The questions would never be answered. The life they had hoped for their granddaughter was taken away in a moment of careless, deliberate choice. And no matter the sentence, it would never bring her back. As the gavel fell, a silence swept over the courtroom. The sentence had been delivered, but for everyone involved, the pain would never end. Lily's life was stolen, a future filled with promise and love taken away in the blink of an eye. And yet, the question lingers. What does it mean to be a responsible parent? What does it mean to care for the ones you brought into this world? Vanessa Harper's story is a painful reminder of the consequences of selfishness, neglect, and the failure to embrace responsibility. But the question remains, how many more children are left to suffer in silence, abandoned by the very people who should love and protect them? How many parents are choosing their desires over the well-being of their children? As we close this chapter, we ask you, what can we do to prevent these tragedies from happening again? How can we as a society ensure that children like Lily are never left to suffer alone again? We encourage you to reflect on your own values, your own actions, and the choices you make. Join the conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more true crime stories that remind us of the importance of justice, accountability, and standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. See you on the next one.